the impact of indirect taxes and subsidies. So the impact of indirect taxes on consumers, producers, and government. So first, there's indirect tax because it's a tax on expenditure. So it means we start thinking about
cost of production.
What?
Tax on cost of production.
No.
No.
There's indirect tax. It's a way government would try to correct market failure or government intervention. So there's government intervention through taxes, there's government intervention through subsidies, which is fiscal. Let me put it this way: there's fiscal policy, there's monetary policy, there's supply side policy. But because we've not gone into Unit 2, that's why they take it a bit out. So government has to intervene in the economy, and for government intervention, it has to come with things that are backed by law. So one of those things are indirect taxes and subsidies. So both indirect taxes and subsidies are part of fiscal policy. So what is the impact of this indirect tax on government, on consumers, on producers, and on workers, right?
Government.
Okay, there's no workers here, but I'm going to talk about workers too. Now, with indirect, workers here are categorized under consumers. Okay, so with indirect tax, it means taxes on expenditure, what we buy, what we eat. That is taxes on what we consume. That is indirect tax. So if government feels or find out that certain products brings about social benefits than social cost, that means it's a merit good, then government would reduce indirect tax on it or increase subsidy on it. So most of the time, government would only initiate indirect taxes on goods that they consider as that bring negative externality, or goods that they know that it's not basic needs for people. Because if government impose indirect taxes on basic needs, then poverty would increase. Do you understand? So indirect tax is a tax on expenditure on what we consume. As a result of that, it's mainly on those things that government feel like they are price elastic. Sorry, they are price inelastic. Do you get the point here? So there's price elasticity based on that fact. So now, if government charges indirect tax, if government increases it, so what is the impact? The impact is that prices of goods and services would increase.
So less consumption.
So if price of goods and services increases, it brings about reduced consumption.
Yeah.
Okay, now. So the impact on producers is that with an increase in indirect taxes, the cost of their production would increase because consumers or producers also buy. They buy from suppliers, they buy components, raw materials from suppliers. So it means whatever components they buy, whatever raw materials they buy, the price has risen. So their cost of production is going to increase. So what happens? The supply curve will shift leftward as a result of that.
Will increase their production.
Because their cost of production would increase. As soon as their cost of production increases, the supply curve will shift leftward because they might not be able to pass on the price to consumers. So do you get it? So the impact on producers is this. Cost of production would increase for producers. It brings about a higher price. Do you understand? So firms that can still meet up with these external factor, might still be intact, might still stay in the business. But most of the firms that are unable to move or that are unable to cope with that doesn't have the flexibility to stay would leave. So that's the impact on producers now. Some producers will still be able to stay with low or no profit, but others would leave the market.
Yes.
Is it clear? Now, on consumers, as soon as indirect taxes increases, what happens to consumers? Consumers will also be worse off because they won't have the ability they won't be able to afford those goods that they can afford. The units they can consume would reduce. Do you get it now? So, if we either through increasing prices or shortage in supply. So what happens with consumers is this, because some firms are going to leave the market. As soon as some firms leave the market, output reduces.
Yeah.
That's the first one. So as soon as output reduces, demand exceeds supply. Shortage. Yes or no? So when there's shortage, prices are expected to increase. So even if producers are not increasing the price, sometimes price cannot be increased, especially if the demand for such products is price elastic. You cannot increase the price. But for the fact that the supply is reducing in the market, definitely price would rise. Yes.
So, for example, producer, the cost of production increases. So this will increase the price and decrease the supply.
Price you don't talk about price first, because sometimes ceteris paribus, price stays. Price, yes. So if price is constant at that time, you might not be able to increase the price. So what people do is this: those that can buy, they will entice you with higher pay to buy. Then they sell behind at an increased price.
Black market?
Yes. Do you get the point here? So it's not like price is going to increase. Most firms might leave the market, but because firms start leaving the market, output in that market reduces. Automatically, price would rise because it is left for few to sell. And when the choice of consumers reduces, prices would rise.
And the supply would decrease, so they have nothing to consume.
Can we say if the price increases, then this will rush into the people who can afford them?
So now let's look at price mechanism. Rationing. When we talk about rationing here, but for the fact that we're talking about indirect taxes, let's put them together.
And rationing, if price increases, it will be only
rationing is a price function.
Okay.
Here we're talking about government intervention.
Okay.
Because when you look at price as a function, it's mostly from the price mechanism.
Even government intervention brings the world for a loss.
So government don't have that capacity to influence price when it comes to a free market. Do you understand? So the point here is that with indirect taxes, supply is expected to fall. Output is expected to fall. Why? Most of the firms might leave the market and output will reduce in the market. So the supply curve will shift leftward. This will mean that consumers or producer surplus would reduce. Do you get the point here? That is about indirect taxes on producers. Now on consumers. For consumers, price is increasing, right? It means, yes?
This is still indirect taxes.
Yes, from consumers now. Prices will increase. Yes or no? Which means the units they used to buy would reduce.
Really explain this.
I know, I'm going to somewhere there. So for consumers, price has increased. But now let's look at consumer in the perspective of workers. So most of the workers would leave job because most of the firms have left the market. So they will lay off workers. Existing firms would find a way to cut their losses too, or cut their cost, which is part of wages. So workers would reduce. Unemployment would increase as a result of that. So consumers will not be able to afford what they used to afford. So that is the impact of indirect tax on consumers. It reduces consumption. That is the point. Now, on government. For government, with indirect tax increasing, government expenditure would rise.
Yeah, and on combustion would reduce.
What?
Consumption of goods will reduce.
No. We talked about consumption of goods is mostly of consumers.
So government
It will reduce welfare loss.
No. The impact is this. Government expenditure on taxes would increase. As a result of that, government might be able to spend on other parts of the economy that has urgency, that needs importance, that is
on
important.
the provision of public goods.
Maybe government can invest or finance infrastructure. Government might finance healthcare. Government might finance education or training. So if government is doing it, whatever government makes from it will be used to finance public expenditure. So that is the impact. Is it clear? So any question about indirect taxes now? They are clear, right? With an increase in indirect tax would reduce consumer surplus, would reduce producer surplus. Will shift the supply curve leftward, will increase the price of a product. It will increase government expenditure or government expenses, government fine or revenue on taxes, which means government might be able to invest or finance public expenditure. Any question now? So indirect taxes is clear.